If there has ever been a lesson that the PlayStation brand has learned over the years, it is that coming out of the gate with a new console that is overpriced can threaten even the strongest of reputations and send gamers flying into the arms of the competition. They, like most companies who have survived long enough in the gaming space to see the launch of a few consoles, have seen both sides of the coin as well as several degrees of success and failure between them. But through it all, never before has Sony had such a stark, obvious contrast in its console launch numbers than the one between the launch of the PS3 and the launch of the PS4. The PS3, with all of its compatibilities with older games, Blu-rays, SD cards, and superior CPU speed, still got trampled for the next couple of years almost entirely because of its absurd launch prices, none of which were reasonable until we saw slimmer, cheaper models come out that removed features to get the price down. Even then, it was still an uphill battle for the PlayStation 3. Sony had to downgrade their own console and struggle through a considerable rebranding effort just to end in what was effectively a draw with the 360 by the end of the generation. Could all of that have been prevented if the price were more in line with current trends? Possibly, yes. Despite the various flaws with the original PS3, no one issue with it did nearly as much damage to its sales as that price. The Xbox One learned a similar lesson at the beginning of the current generation too, so Sony shouldn't count on any mistakes on Microsoft's end in this department either. They're gonna have to make the right call here on their own. Deciding the price range for a game console that launches in 2020 will be a very different situation than deciding it for 2013 though. Obviously, the lesson of keeping it as low as possible is still fresh on everybody's mind, but 2020 will be a notably different era than 2013. People want more than ever out of their gaming consoles, and both Sony and Microsoft have made no secret that they intend to meet those expectations with 8K resolutions, solid-state drives, ray tracing, 120 frames per second, and other features that are unparalleled by anything we've ever seen in a console thus far. The global economy is also a factor, as there is, generally speaking, less stability with overseas manufacturers, which could easily lead to a spike in production costs at any time, depending on what happens there. So there are plenty of legitimate pressures to potentially jack the price of the PlayStation 5 up to $499, or maybe even higher. So saying it's a clear-cut decision between $400 or $500 is not as clearly cut as it might seem on the surface. One major factor in deciding a launch price for a console is what the competition is doing. The odds are good Xbox has learned the lesson of having a console that costs more than $100 more than their competitors, but that doesn't necessarily mean they'll make it $399. If they think the next PlayStation is going to be $499, you better believe they'll consider matching it. And if Sony thinks that is the case, they could easily go ahead and hit us with $499 as well. That may be a few too many layers of assumptions deep, but perhaps not. There are some factors that are just completely out of Sony's control on this too. With the custom solid-state drive that Sony has touted, support for resource hogging effects like ray tracing, 8K, and super high frame rates, it's not entirely crazy to see why many sources are betting their bottom dollar on a $499 price tag, at least at launch. Sony is no stranger to taking a loss on a console at launch, but surely there is a limit somewhere. They can't have unlimited tolerance for that price structure. So again, this points towards something in the $499 area. Sony does have a history of largely doing a good job of nailing their price points though. The PS1 launched at $299 in North America, which was cheaper than most of its competition. This was an era of great change in gaming. Lots of unknown quantities like the Sega Saturn, the Atari Jaguar, and the Nintendo 64 were all sort of doing their own things, and it was tough to predict how everything was going to land. Sony, being the newest kid on the block, wisely launched with one of the most consumer-friendly prices of the lot and let their games do the talking. This resulted in a resounding win for Sony in the generation, and they largely stuck to that script with the PlayStation 2. This, again, was a very different time than the mid-90s. Nintendo and Microsoft were largely all falling in line with very similar architectures and features, so Sony just stuck to the same price as the original, and again, relied on exclusives and a friendly price to do the talking. As we all know, the PlayStation 2 would also go on to sell like hotcakes and once again dominate its competition. The PS3 is where Sony overshot it. $499 $4.99 and $5.99 models were all well beyond the price of the Nintendo Wii and the Xbox 360, and it also didn't help things that Sony's third home console was late to the party, launching many months after Nintendo's and Microsoft's offerings. The PlayStation 4 was more of a return to form, and Sony went back down to something that resembled its first two consoles in price, accounting for inflation. $399 was a nice sweet spot that Microsoft would miss, giving Sony the luxury of sitting back and letting their games make the case for the PS4. If any era is comparable to where Sony is now, it's likely the PlayStation 2. Sony can stick to the script here after their surprise success and ultimately just build on it with their current console. If Sony would like to see a mirror of that era in 2020, $399 would probably be that sweet spot. With all of these variables to consider, Sony has its hands full when it comes to deciding between $499 and $399. Are gamers ready to pay half a grand for a gaming console at high enough rates to keep Sony's box competitive? Or is it best to play it safe with a lower price and take the hit of a larger loss on each sale? As you probably understand by now, there is a compelling case to be made for either choice. Neither would be incomprehensible. The only way I could see Sony really going off the rails is if they went back up to $599, but that would require such a monumental lapse in judgment as well as an alarming amount of amnesia that it's nearly unthinkable at this stage for anybody to consider that amount of money for a gaming box. Despite its various features, if last generation is any indicator, we'll probably find out the truth here in the next few months, and we will definitely be there to help sort that info out for you when the time comes. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed and would like to see more, feel free to hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell to ensure you'll be notified when new videos go up.